It is entitled Annual Review. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable unto you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Last year, he summed it up as the Festival of Sleaze, or the kind of year that made a person look back fondly on the Gulf oil spill. Yes, this was Dave Barry's irreverent assessment of the year 2011, as he reviewed everything from congressmen's peccadillos to the antics of actor Charlie Sheen, who claimed to drink tiger's blood. Time magazine's iconic Person of the Year, that for the past 84 years has been the individual or group or thing this magazine names as having the greatest impact, was none other than the Protester in 2011, a moniker representing everything from the protesters of the Arab Spring to the protesters of, do you remember this one, Occupy Wall Street, or occupy just about any major U.S. city center. There are Grammys, Emmys, Oscars, Tonys that all make annual determinations as to the best examples in the dramatic and the musical arts. And then there are professional annual reviews, performance assessments at our jobs that celebrate the initiative we've taken on some of our projects and highlighted areas that we need to develop our skills further. The end of the year is thought to be the right time to take a step back, take stock, assess, and evaluate. Well, it seems to me that today is an occasion for such evaluation, assessment, not of our professional skills or our domestic abilities, but rather of our allegiances. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving, Pastor Katie. It's a holiday weekend. Don't be such a Debbie Downer. Lighten up. True enough. We're all still feeling a bit soporific from all that turkey. But consider this. Next week, we enter the season of Advent, the first season of the church year, with this wide-eyed hope for the coming of Christ into the world. So, that makes this Sunday the last Sunday of the church year. It's a New Year's Eve of sorts in the life of the church. So it's a day in which we do well to engage in some personal and communal annual review, to reflect, assess, and evaluate the year gone by. Today is our namesake Sunday, Christ the King Sunday. Thanks to our fabulous altar guild, our paraments are white, because it's a festival day. A relatively new observance, I might add, in the church year, with roots hardly deeper than a century. In the late 1800s, several of the world's great empires, the British, the American, the Spanish, the French, the German, the Russian, the Japanese, they were all either at war or about to go to war somewhere. So the Catholic Pope at the time wrote a letter in which he dedicated the world to Christ the King. And as a vote for peace, he reminded the empires that God is present with the whole human race, even with those who perhaps do not know God. Sadly, World War I still ensued, but the desire to acknowledge the power and rule of Christ over all creation remained. The festival moved around a bit before eventually settling on this day, the last Sunday of the church year. So we Lutherans, being liturgical and all, join with some other denominations in setting this morning aside to honor Christ as ruler of the universe and eternal King, and also to evaluate, assess, and even judge the degree to which we name him as such in our own lives. Our lessons, though cryptic, help us with this exercise. The first reading is an apocalyptic passage from Daniel. Apocalyptic means unveiling or unfolding of things not previously known. And scholars believe that this colorful, symbolic style of literature in Daniel was intended to give consolation and hope to a post-exilic Israelite community, living probably after the conquest of Alexander the Great of the Holy Land, when the Greek influences were threatening to undermine the Israelite customs and ways of worship. So the visions described were designed to remind the community that their God was king and that they could hold on because their king was stronger than the forces that would threaten to undo them, and that all peoples, all nations, and all languages were to serve this king. An everlasting, almighty Son of Man comes down from the clouds of heaven and is given dominion and glory and everlasting kingship. So now we fast forward a few centuries, and the image we see is kind of repeated and expanded upon in the other apocalyptic reading this morning, this one from the first chapter of Revelation, possibly written toward the end of the first century when the Jews this time are being persecuted by the Romans. And here again, what do we read? But there's a king. This time, specifically, a king named Jesus. And he's depicted on a throne coming down, remember that, from clouds in heaven like that Son of Man in Daniel. And he's described as the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the everlasting ruler Jesus as king, ruler of all.